This was the very first rock and roll song I played in public.
Hey, Internet. Welcome to Worldview Everlasting, your favorite YouTube addiction. On this week's show, a question about why the end of the world didn't happen and how on earth a generation passed away without passing away. Although that's really kind of a misleading way of talking about it. A question about the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD. You might want to stick around, yeah? Right on. But first, it's time for your issues, etc. question of the week. Hi, we team. I am a German Lutheran attending a Lutheran congregation and enjoying the traditional liturgy. We tend to call it the divine liturgy, yes?
Well, isn't that special?
Yet in conversations about Lutheran liturgy with Christians from radical Protestant denominations, I wouldn't know how to explain it to them. Would you please explain to me the value of the liturgy and the use of traditional hymns with concrete examples? And also maybe touch on the danger of more loose worship practices like many free churches have. Thanks. This is a great question, not disconnected from the question we had from Issues Etc. question of the week last week. But it's also one that's really too big to cover outside of maybe Project Awesome in one of our regular shows. Now, we've linked to this before, but it's really just worth linking to again and again and again. Issues Etc. did a 24-part series with Pastor Will Whedon in 2012 and 2013 on the meaning, purpose, usefulness, etc. of the Divine Liturgy. It goes through every single piece of the Divine Service and explains why it's there and why we should never think about it not being there. If you want to really be able to learn how to express what you believe and why you believe it about the Divine Liturgy, this is the best resource out there right now, bar none. Check it out in the links below.
Email.
Aight, here we go. Pastor Fisk, how do you explain Matthew 24:34, Mark 13:30, and Luke 21:32? Ha! Very, very carefully. Yeah. But seriously, if you go and you check out each of these verses, what you find is that within the synoptic gospels, that is, the seemingly to look like each other gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you have parallel passages dealing with parallel ideas, at the heart of which is this one phrase that takes up about one verse in each of the accounts, although the accounts do have some slight differences between them, as is always the case with the synoptics. You're looking at things from a different perspective. Sometimes you see one thing, sometimes you see another on the edge of that same real thing, right? So, we're not going to be able in one show that is trying to get down to 7 minutes one of these weeks to be able to go through and exegete all of Matthew 24 apart from that. Now, there is this entire genre of literature in the Bible called apocalyptic literature, particularly found in things like the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation. Zechariah gets connected to this as well, in which there is clear and intentional symbolic language at use for the sake of conveying points in a way that oppressive powers might not understand what's being said. I mean, imagine if you had to write a letter to 7 churches that you're not supposed to be in contact with, and that's why they put you on this island in a jail cell in exile. Maybe if you're going to actually get to write the letter to them, you're not going to say things like the current Caesar's the Antichrist, right? Instead, you're going to use this revelatory language, making use of imagery from the Old Testament in order to speak about the present time. Apocalyptic genre. And this is something not native to the Bible entirely, because you also find this in intertestamental Judaism. So there's some of this going on in Matthew chapter 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21, which is kind of the starting point for the confusion. The verse in question really isn't talking in this way, but things before the verse are talking in this way. And so the biggest challenge is going to be wrapping your mind around the fact that when Jesus says things like the stars are going to fall from the sky and the sun will be darkened, he doesn't necessarily mean that that's actually going to happen. He may instead be talking about something like the rise and fall of kingdoms, or particularly the rise and fall of the Old Covenant. That everything that was normal before is no longer normal, and it's been a total radical change. Since this question is essentially dealing with the end of the Old Covenant insofar as the temple destruction in Jerusalem, we're going to look at that, this actually makes a whole lot of sense. It's not really a giant reach unless you're just going to be arrogant and presume that everything you read has to live up to your own modern standards of newspaper and or science textbook etiquette. Alright, so So, verse in question followed by exegesis of the passages surrounding it, combined with reason for thinking that this is the right way to read it. Yeah, the only way. Verse in question, Matthew 24, verse 34. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. So Jesus, speaking to his 12 disciples, who he is training to be ambassadors to the nation, says to them that all the things he's just said before this verse are going to take place before they die. But he said things like, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heaven to the other. Now, many people in the history of interpretation have said, well, clearly that's talking about the end of the world. Obviously. The problem is then that the world didn't end before that generation died. And so people then will say, oh look, Jesus made a mistake. Oh look, the early Christians didn't really understand everything. Oh look, the Bible is not inerrant, it has errors, and so we can kind of pick and choose what we want. It's a liberal's playground. The thing is, you really have to take the text all by itself without any of its surrounding context to come to the conclusion that it is about the end of the world and not apocalyptic language dealing with the end of the Old Covenant and the rise of the New Testament church, centered around the death and resurrection of Jesus and the destruction of the temple itself, which is precisely the question which Jesus is answering. So let's let context be king here, right? Let's let context inform what the text means and not try to read it in a vacuum. So if you jump back to the start of the chapter, you will notice that Matthew has set the entire discourse by telling us Jesus left the temple and was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple, right? So they're leaving the temple. This is actually during Holy Week, and his disciples are like, oh, cool, look at all the buildings. Aren't they spiffy, Jesus? This is going to be where your kingdom is. But he answered them, you see all these, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be one stone left standing upon another that will not be thrown down. You like the pretty buildings? Well, guess what? I's gonna destroy them. Now, verse 3 continues this. They go down the valley and up to the Mount of Olives, so they're on the opposite side of the valley from these same buildings that they've been talking about. And you can imagine that they're looking at the buildings and they're thinking about, God, Jesus just said this was all gonna get destroyed. As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Now here, giant key hint, you just can't miss it, and if you do miss it, if you refuse to see it, it's gonna cause you trouble in interpreting the passage. How many questions do the disciples ask? And it's not how many questions do the disciples think they're asking, it's how many questions do they actually ask. When will these things be? That would be one. And what will be the sign, singular, of your coming and of the end of the age? That'd be two. Now, they think this is the same thing, that these things, the temple being destroyed, are connected to the end of the world, just like most people who misread this text in our present day. But Jesus has a different idea. He sees that these are actually two entirely different realities, and so he's going to answer their questions in kind. So you have now a sort of hat tip highlighter answer, like introduction points scattered into the text to tell you which of these questions he's answering and when. And that distinction is the distinction between those days and that day. When will these things take place? That is the destruction of the temple. Jesus is going to answer this by talking about, well, in those days, these kinds of things are going to be happening. Then he's going to say, but about that day, the sign of his coming, the one and only singular day of the end of the world, well, there's something different going on about that. And fantastically, you'll end up seeing that Matthew chapter 24, verse 34, about the generation not passing away until all these things take place, is talking about all these things that will take place in those days. And the very next verse says, but concerning that day, and even that hour, nobody knows. There are no signs. Not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son know concerning the end of the age and the Son's coming. Only the Father knows. So you gotta watch those words carefully. Those days and that day. Two questions Jesus gives, two answers. Once you have that, the whole thing falls into place, with the exception of trying to understand what that apocryphal language is really pointing to. But everything else is pretty straight up. So they ask him these two questions, and he says, well, see that nobody leads you astray. See that nobody teaches you contrary to what I'm teaching you about this. Oh, I don't know, like trying to pick the day and the hour when Jesus is going to come back? No one's ever done that, have they?
The president is the Antichrist, and the rapture is within 5 days.
Many are going to come in my name, he says, and they're going to lead many people astray. But you're going to hear about wars and rumors of wars. Don't be alarmed. All of this has to take place. You can think back to the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, another view of this from Revelation. War, famine, injustice, and desolation are all things that are just kind of taking place in the earth no matter what, ever since the fall. You can't escape them. So don't let them convince you that the end of the world is near. Just because things are bad out there doesn't mean the end of the world's coming.
Make sure that He is your Lord and your Master. This is the end, people.
I mean, it does mean that, but it's always meant that, and it's always gonna mean that, and it's nothing new. Don't be alarmed. Nation is gonna rise against nation. There's gonna be famines. There's gonna be earthquakes. All these are but the beginnings of birth pains. This is not a sign of anything. And you, my 12 ambassadors, my 12 apostles, they are gonna deliver up to tribulation, and they're gonna put you to death. Hey, did that happen before the rest of the generation passed away? Yeah, I think that it did. You, specifically, you 12, are gonna be hated by all nations for my sake. See, here's again one of those places where it's like, it's so easy to just read myself in the text. The text says you, so it must be talking about me, right? Like, it can't have anything to do with the context and who he's actually talking to. Yeah, the Bible's about me and what God wants for my life, right?
It's all about me.
It's a love letter from God, right? No, this is a catalog of the history of Jesus talking to his apostles. And when he says you, plural, to them, it means them, not us. Not necessarily, not unless there's a reason from the text for it to mean us. They were delivered up, they were hated, and they were martyred. For his sake, which is actually for your sake. Many will fall away, many false prophets will arise. Did that happen before the generation passed away? Pretty sure it did. So much so that there is even a story about the apostle John running screaming from a bathhouse naked because he didn't want to be in the same room as a false teacher who he knew was condemned to hell, lest he be part of that judgment and have the ceiling falling on it. Now, perhaps that's apocryphal, but nonetheless, false teachers, did they arise in the apostles' lives? Yes. Hello, Paul wrote like entire books to entire congregations about this. Galatians, anybody?
Bueller.
But the one who endures to the end will be saved. Again, he's talking to his apostles. You know, don't fall away just because there's false prophets out there, guys. Because this gospel of my reign, of my kingdom, you guys are being sent to preach throughout the entire world as a testimony to the nations. And it's only after that you have done this that the end of the temple will come, which is exactly what happened. In fact, almost all of them were dead by the time the temple was destroyed. Now, there's a few exceptions to that, but nonetheless, Paul had gotten to Spain.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition.
You know?
You are hereby charged that you did on diverse nights commit heresy against the Holy Church.
And so, if you did happen to be alive at the time of the temple, Jesus kind of wanted them to, well, get out of there and not get killed with the temple. After all, they're asking, no, do we have to be a part of this? So he says, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then let those who are left in Judea flee to the mountains. Now, he literally is meaning that when you see the holy place of the temple being desecrated in the most vile and disgusting of ways, get the heck out of Dodge, people.
Run away! Run away! Run away!
Don't stay there because the end is near. This actually happened when the Zealots, remember that party of warrior Jews who wanted to cast off the Roman Empire? They took over the city and actually used the temple as its stronghold, slaughtering some of the priests themselves. And interestingly enough, history records that at that time when that happened, guess who left town? The Christians. The reader might have understood back then, you think? And then there's these warnings about hurrying. Let the one on the rooftop not go back in the house. Let the one in the field not go back for his cloak.
Not gonna work here anymore anyway.
Alas for women who gotta be pregnant while they're traveling cross country at this time. All of this is his way of saying, once you see these things happen, you need to leave because the armies of Rome are coming to destroy this place and you don't want to be here when they get here because there will be great tribulation, such as has not been from the beginning of the world until now, which doesn't necessarily mean that there were never bad times that were just as bad. In fact, it's like a parallel. Even that language is similar to the language that was talked about the first time Jerusalem was destroyed by Babylon. And notice he says, if those days surrounding the destruction of the temple had not been cut short, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. It's limited, it's contained, it's confined. But if anyone says to you, look, there's the Christ at the temple, don't believe it. Don't go in there. The zealots are not going to bring me back. But false Christs and false prophets will arise and they're going to perform wonders and miracles.
How many of you are missing cartilage in your knees? Put a hand up. Lord's going to create cartilage tonight.
And lead astray, if possible, even the elect. Kind of a good hat tip for all time to recognize just because someone can do a miracle doesn't make it from God.
So right here, those older gentlemen and women who are so honored to have lived such a long life, first get healed, the power of God comes and touches them, then they give their life to the Lord.
See, I have told you, plural guys, beforehand. So if they say to you, look, he's in the inner room or he's out in the desert, don't go there, because when I actually do come back, it'll light up the sky as from the east to the west, and everyone's going to see it. So, I mean, don't think you're going to go find me in a closet. But check it out. So there's this tribulation in those days with the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, and immediately then, everything's going to change. Nothing's going to ever be the same again. The sun will be darkened, the moon will give his light, the stars will fall from the sky, and they will appear in heaven. Where? In heaven? On earth. In heaven. In heaven. It says in heaven. There will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn. Well, why would that be? Because they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. Now, here's a real important thing. Context, context, context. If you look at the reference, where has it been prophesied that the Son of Man will come with the clouds? It's happening in the book of Daniel. And it's so very clear from the passages, if you go there, that him coming upon the clouds is not him coming down. It's him going up. The Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven that the whole earth has as a sign in heaven which causes the earth to mourn is Jesus ascending to the right hand of God the Father and destroying the temple as his revelation that he now is in charge of the entire world. And at this point, he's going to send out his messengers. You can translate it as angels. You could also translate it as apostles, I suppose. His preachers, his Christians, to the ends of the earth, to the four corners, to gather the elect. Hey, is that what the church is doing by preaching the gospel and delivering the sacraments? Yeah, I think it is. So it doesn't have to be about the last day? No, it doesn't. Could it be about the last day? I suppose I could be wrong, but it doesn't have to be about the last day. And given that he's still talking about those days, immediately after those days, all this is going to happen. Should really tip you off as to what's going on. Hey, you apostles, you can tell from the fig tree when it puts out its leaves that the summer is near. Well, here's the reality, that when you see that abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, when you see the temple being actually physically desecrated by pagan practices, you know that the judgment of this temple of which I have just prophesied is near, yes, even at the gates. Even as Rome came to those gates in 70 AD, marched up to the top, tore the whole thing down, and continued to desecrate it as a sign that it was no more and never would be again. And it hasn't been. In fact, right now, there's the most giantest mosque ever sitting right on top of the spot. I tell you, you want World War III to happen, try rebuilding that temple. There's entire church bodies dedicated to that.
Ultimately, the grand scheme of the Zionist plot is to reclaim Jerusalem and rebuild Solomon's temple, which was destroyed by the Romans almost 2,000 years ago.
Them's some crazy people, I gotta say. They don't understand this text at all. Truly, I say to you, this generation, you people I'm talking to right now, will not pass away until all this has taken place, all of this being nothing more than the destruction of the temple and the sending of Christianity as the church to the ends of the earth to preach the gospel. Not that hard. Pretty much has taken place. Did take place. Heaven and earth are going to pass away, but my words will never pass away, he says. This is going to happen. A mark of Jesus' prophecy in the New Testament. What he says always comes true. Now, next verse. But. Don't miss the but. It's a really big but. But concerning that day and that hour, nobody knows at all. There is no sign of my coming or of the end of the age. Instead, it's going to be like the days of Noah, before the flood, where people think everything is normal. They eat, they drink, they get married, they have fun, everything is fine. They're partying and thinking life can be fixed right up until the day that the rain started. And by then, Noah was already in the ark. So when that happens, when the end of the world comes, some people will be saved and some people won't. And it's just going to be bam, no more chances, face the judgment. So, hey, you who do believe, stay awake. Don't let this life convince you that it's what really matters. You don't know on what day your Lord is returning, so live as if he's coming back today or tomorrow. And know this, that if the master of the house had known at what time the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and not let his house be broken into. So you be ready for the Son of Man to come back at any hour, at any moment, at any day. Because many generations will pass away and have passed away and it hasn't yet taken place. But since the other thing he said would take place did take place before that generation did pass away, you can bet your sweet bippy this one's going to take place too. And so the church has always confessed, I look for the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. Who is the faithful and wise servant? The one who the master finds doing what he was left to do, which for you is to live in your vocation and confess the creed, to pray the Lord's Prayer and to receive his word and sacrament as your binding, fused proof and permanent, beneficial, effective sign of his presence and activity in your life to take you through that last day to that life of the world to come. But if the wicked servant says to himself, look, my master is delayed, and begins to beat his fellow servants and eat and drink with the drunkards, that is, to live as if life is about right now and for me, the master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect. This is speaking to all who are without belief, even those who feign belief, the hypocrites who pretend to believe but actually don't believe at all. And he will cut him into pieces and put him with the hypocrites. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Them some hard words, yeah? Next you have the parable of the virgins, all connected to Jesus basically saying about that day, that final day, you don't know the day or the hour, so watch. What does that mean? Receive word and sacrament regularly, seek to live in your vocation, but trust in Jesus Christ crucified to be the answer to getting through the fire and flames of that day. In the meantime, don't miss out the prophecy that was foretold and took place in 70 AD, those days of great tribulation surrounding the destruction of the temple and the end of the old covenant, the final termination of the Levitical codes and laws, the dismissing of the mark of circumcision, and the proof of its replacement with the baptism of the one who ascended to the heavens and now sends to all nations his word and sacrament for you. Hope that answers. That's how I would explain Matthew chapter 24, Luke chapter 21, and Mark chapter 16. The other two, they're pretty much the same thing. You don't have the nice hat tip of those days that day and the two questions quite as lined up, but taking this as your key and reading Mark and Luke through Matthew, which you should kind of always do, the answer becomes pretty clear. Hope that helps out. Thanks for tuning in. Remember, you can always like, subscribe, and share this if you like what Worldview Everlasting is doing. I'm sure your friends and enemies will neither appreciate it. Maybe they will. We'll see. You can help what we're doing here, working our way toward Project Awesome with $5 a month, joining the Lutheran Ninja Clan. More information about that below as well. Till next time, if there even is a next time.
5 days. Count 'em. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days.
Don't just stay awake, but stay awake and rock on.
And she's climbing.